K.K. Anand. I'm from Bombay, Cedar Consulting. My question is to Professor Kennedy. Do you think population growth slow down in the future?
Chairman, could you repeat that? I just couldn't.
Well, he's saying, do you foresee, and if you do, you must be a better man than most of us, do you foresee India's population reducing? Is that one of the futuristic trends that...
Growth reducing.
Population growth?
Slowing down.
Okay, growth going down. Well...
it would be surprising if the rate of growth did not steadily decrease in the years to come, as it has been beginning to decrease now. There are a number of reasons why countries' rates of growth begin to taper away from high fertility levels of 6, 7, 8, 9 children per family. One of them is rising standards of living. Another is people moving from the countryside into the cities, where children suddenly become less useful. On the countryside, they chase for chickens and they do useful things. In the city, they get cramped out. And I can't but think that there will be an overall tendency of a decrease in the rate of growth, percentage on percentage. There will be a slowing down. But we have to remember that when a large population like India and China experiences a decline in the rates of growth of population, that's like a big oil tanker or USS Enterprise at sea. You cut off the engines, but you're still going a long way before you really have complete balance or lower than fertility rates. But it will come, except in certain cultures where the significance of having a high family is more important than the significance of higher standards of living or education for your young woman or other factors which usually feed into the decline.
Thank you. Yes, please. I'll come back to you. Yes.
May I?
My name is Vineet Chaudhary. I'm from Delhi. In the earlier part of your presentation, you were focusing on the defense budgets and defense proportions. You mentioned United States constituted 39% of the world defense budgets already, and this year they are going to, or in the last year, they're going to increase it to as high as 50%. What message are they trying to send to the world by doing so? Is it a constant fear that they must increase? Or is it that they are trying to show that the economic power is through defense spending? Would you like to address this, please?
Yes, I'll have a try at that one, because it's a question which is definitely going to be asked in this year's US elections by a large number of people. I ought to say, as a further point for pondering, I have to make a remark that this defense spending of up to a half of all world defense spending comes at a time when two things have happened in the past 10 years. One is that beginning about 1991, the US economy recovered from many years of being in the doldrums. And because of new technologies, especially electronic technologies, that economy began to grow at growth rates of 3, 4, 5, 5.5% a year. And when you grow at compounded rates of 5% a year, as India is beginning to experience, you actually, not only do you get rich, but if your defense spending is kept at a relatively same level as it was in the Clinton years, then the share of American gross domestic product, which the Pentagon requires even at these enormous absolute totals, the percentage is smaller by quite a way then the burden of defense spending, both in the early part of the Cold War and in the Caspar, Weinberger, and Reagan years, where it was up to about 6.5% to 7% of GDP. Now it's about 4% of GDP. American conservatives would say, well, A, it's very good that we're spending so much because we've got so many enemies out there, and we want to convince any other rising state that they won't get close to us. This is very clearly what Wolfowitz and Pearl and others say and believe. But the other thing is, well, we can pay for it. Just make sure that we keep having supply side, tax cut, economic revolution, so that our industries and our capital flows keep going in the right way, and we will keep way ahead of everyone else, and we will be able to bash everybody else. But it won't really cost us the burden that brought down imperial Spain or mid-1930s Britain or the other powers in the past. Therefore, that guy up at Yale, Professor Kennedy, is a real idiot because he doesn't realize that the United States is a totally different new type of nation than any other of the great powers in the past. We don't buy this overstretch. We don't buy this burdened down by defense expenditures. We can take it. We might cut Social Security expenditures, but we can take defense expenditures. The second part of is, what are they trying to say? I mentioned part of what they're trying to say, which is, and it comes out of the Wolfowitz document of the year 1992, which was that the United States should take measures to ensure that nobody else would get close to it in terms of strategic and military measures of power. And that we would be, the United States would be unassailable with whatever weapon systems you tried. But it also, to my mind, reveals something which is the flip side of that aggressiveness and assertiveness and belief that you will always be in the lead, which is this compound of American insecurities about the world we live in. The insecurities because they're very much a people which doesn't understand what's going on in the world outside. There's an American cosmopolitan traveling elite. There's the Yale undergraduates who take Professor Kennedy's courses. They know all about the world outside and travel in it, but many do not. There's a kind of, you've seen this in so many manifestations. We don't want to be tied down by international organizations. We don't want international governance. We don't want somebody telling us from a Kyoto Protocol what we can do with our automobile emissions. The Al-Qaeda, the terrorism and everything else like that has just added to this collection of apprehensions about foreignness or differentness or some things out there which sooner or later will undermine the American way of life. And standing firm on the defense side seems to be the best way of protecting ourselves in this terribly uncertain world. That's my best answer as I listen to this debate going on there.
Mr. Kennedy?
I'm sorry.
I'm Pavan Mehra from Sunbury, Idaho, visiting here. A quick question. You've given us a model of Goldman Sachs, which is very clean. I'm wondering if you can add some scenarios which you possibly see happening in the current world and see how they would affect what you've shown us. Thank you.
Thank you. Boy, I should have got out to the airport before you asked me this question. Yes, you can do scenarios. Let me tell you one or two, and you probably may have your own since you've been thinking about this, but you know, when you go along to the Naval War College in Newport or some of the folks working in strategic studies, they're thinking of a different sort of future world than the Goldman Sachs world of here come the BRICS. They're looking at other data runs. They're looking at other bits of evidence which Goldman Sachs doesn't care about. If you go to Annapolis or to Newport, you will see the mid-level naval officers there wargaming for the future contest over control of the seas in the Western Pacific. If you go to read Professor Paul Braggon's book called Asia Rising, you find an argument which gets the US Navy very, very worried, because Braggon argues that that both China and India will have this larger than the West sustained growth. They will transfer an increased amount of their resources to defense and weapon systems. They will not be building enterprise-class battle groups because they will go around enterprise-class battle groups. They will be building medium to long-range surface-skimming missiles with a variety of warheads in such numbers that no US admiral would want to get within 200 miles or 300 miles or 400 miles of the China coast or the Indian coast. In other words, the strategy which is evolving is one of ocean denial or coastal defense denial, but it will be a pushing out. Some other strategies here, some other scenarios. The gloomy boys at, say, the World Watch Institute, that is to say, really concerned environmentalists, some of whom with a pretty good economic background, but also environmental science background, who look at the BRICS projections upwards of 1.4 billion Chinese and 1.1 billion Indians, and do a calculation on the energy consumption necessary as one goes up to those very high totals of GDP, and they just say, this isn't going to work. Unless we have some newer smart technologies, this is not going to work. We are reaching what they called threshold points. I rather like that term. In other words, you're not there yet, but the Earth is giving signs of distress, which suggests that total world growth and use of the planet, and particularly of large Asian economies, is reaching thresholds where we have to take seriously the possibility of large regional ecocide. And this has to be the number one agenda. Number one agenda is not whether China's number one or United States is number one. It might be, are we going to have a planet to measure anything on in the year 2050? Now, there's a big scientific debate out there. Not all the evidence points to catastrophe. But there's a scenario which is totally outside the realm of just measuring growth rates or aircraft carriers. There are other scenarios, the ones about perhaps India, despite, sounds like I'm contradicting myself from the first question, but I'm listening to you, listening some of the scenarios, which is that India actually does not get a reduction in fertility rates and in population rates, and therefore has severe stresses in the social fabric. It continues to have a perhaps flourishing middle class of 20 to 25% of the population, but continues also to have a desperately poor underclass of 70 or 75%, and that doesn't look a good recipe for a long-term and sustainable future.
Thank you. Yes, please.
I'm Nitin Shukla from Shell Hazira Gas, Ahmedabad.
Do you say from Shell?
That's right.
Yeah.
My question is that in your opinion, sir, what can be two reasons, either acts or omissions, and something on which India has control, internal, not externally influenced, which may prevent India from achieving the projections of Goldman Sachs? Thank you.
How about, I think there's too much long-distance air travel and being put in prison by immigration officers has got.
Yeah, even, I mean, if you could just, repeat the question, because quite frankly...
I'm sorry, I just couldn't hear all the way up
Okay.
here.
In your opinion, what can be two reasons which may prevent India from achieving those targets?
Okay, basically two reasons why India may not achieve its targets.
Well, let me just get straight the term targets, because it's critical for the debate which you are going to have in the next decades. If the targets is just the Goldman Sachs targets, then I think some of the scenarios which I mentioned could well stop those projections. But the real debate, I believe, which has to take place in this country, and is already taking place in some of the think tanks and in some of the ministries, is about the contents of the word targets. I mean, it seems to me that one should be, and this is not just for India, it's for any country or society thinking about its future, that one should try to, whatever time horizon you have, and bear in mind that all these time horizons are just approximate, what I would find more satisfactory is a description of the India you want to have in the year 2025. What are the aspects of Indian society you would like to be strengthened? What are the weaknesses in education or healthcare you would like to be corrected? Do we have to prioritize a bit among them? What are the most intelligent ways of meeting those targets? And I think if you produce a holistic set of aims for both not just a wealthier India, but a healthier India, then you probably protect yourself from catastrophe and disaster, because the target that you have designed and defined is a one not just about how do we get India up to $25,000 a year per capita, but how do we get India up to being a large and influential country in world affairs with a more equitable social balance and a reputation for a lot of skills which can contribute to world society.
Okay, I think we have time for just one more question. Yes, please.
Professor Kennedy, my name is Vinay K. Chaudhary. I'm from Delhi. You mentioned about the American apprehension that today U.S. is apprehensive of what could undermine the American way of life. And we all have seen a few instances in the recent past. But going forward on the projections that you did show all of us, this American apprehension on what would undermine their way of life, what do you believe and what do you see would be the effects in the short term on our country, on India?
Can I have it again? What would be?
The long-term and the short-term effects on India.
On India of America?
of the apprehensions that exist?
in America.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. Short-term effects, I don't reckon to be very large. I think the debate in the United States in the past 12 months has shifted ground somewhat from what looked to be the dominance of the neoconservative position of 24 months ago. There is more understanding that even the United States, with all its power, faces limitations. There is more apprehension among the business groups and the bankers that the current American trade and budgetary deficits are unsustainable, and there's going to be a crack there unless there's a correction. There is an unease among many Americans at how unpopular their country has become in the world. So, seen both from a viewpoint of more liberal Americans, but also from the strategic advisors who surround the Pentagon and in the State Department, good relations with India and improving relations with India make a lot of sense. It's too, apart from one or two alarmists, you can't really make a case that India purchasing a Russian aircraft carrier is altering the naval balances of the globe. It just is silly. The longer term one, though, is more interesting. It brings with it the danger of the longer term and the scenario business. But it does seem to me that if India and China achieve somewhere like the Goldman Sachs forecast increases, whilst improving the quality of life within their countries and preventing environmental stress of a massive nature, if they do that, then the United States will be facing, for the first time, it thought it was facing it in the 1950s, but it wasn't. It will be facing, for the first time in the year 2040, 2050, what every leading power, what every number one power faced in that part of its history, which is somebody else catching up on you and somebody else going past you. And this is a topic which, you know, I've written about and thought about for many years, because one interesting question is how does the lead power react to being overtaken? How does it react to decade-on-decade shifts in the global balances, which make it number 2 or number 3? That very, very rarely happens. They tend to contest it. They don't want it to happen. The only case where I can think it happened was late 19th century and early 20th century Great Britain, where British elites said, if we contest the rise of American power, we'll just get into a pretty catastrophic war for all of us. And therefore the best thing to go is for an Anglo-American entente. Remember, the 19th century was full of Anglo-American antagonisms. 20th century is different. You said you had a very good visit by Bill Clinton last time. He came to Yale just before Christmas, back to his alma mater, and gave a really interesting talk. He was trying to avoid being a former president criticizing incumbent, but he did make remarks about what United States policy should be, which caused me to fall off my seat in astonishment. And let me share this one anecdote with you, because I think we could go away with this thought. He said the United States should now be striving to create a system of international stability which would ensure America's interest and security when it was no longer number one. I've never heard any other American politician say that what we should be doing now is looking to what is the best international system which will serve us when we're no longer top dog, when we're part of a group of countries sharing wealth and power. The only person the only persons I can think of who said that were Prime Minister Gladstone and Prime Minister Balfour in Great Britain. What do we want to see of the world when Britain loses its lead? And here's Clinton saying, this is what America should be doing. But the attitudes that are much more common, and this would be true of other Democrats as well as Republicans, is that we'd prefer not to think of that scenario. We just like to think of staying ahead. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. May I now...
Thank you.